space program.
Visibility 25 miles. Temperature 62, dew point 12. Wind is calm. Throttle altimeter 29.90. Yes, more approach is on.
Up, flies up.
Wings Concorde Flight 1, clear taxi, runway 28 right.
Wings Concorde Flight 1, clear taxi 28 right.
Wings Flight 1 is cleared to explore the jet age. Depart runway 28 right, maintain runway heading to 3,000 feet. Proceed via important milestones. Climb to flight level 350. Examine development of jet aircraft over the last 50 years.
Wings Concorde 1 Heavy, ready for takeoff.
Wings Concorde 1 Heavy, cleared takeoff, runway 28 right.
Wings Concorde 1 Heavy, running.
Concorde is still the only supersonic airliner in service, crossing the Atlantic in under 3.5 hours. This airplane has been in service since March 1969. By the time this video is over, it will be a third of the way across the Atlantic, flying at twice the speed of sound. Welcome to the fascinating story of the jet age. We're going to sample a few choice chapters, although it's impossible to cover the whole story in such a short time. Perhaps one of the most awe-inspiring stories is the spectacular flying displays put on by a team like the Red Arrows of the Royal Air Force in their British Aerospace Hawks. They perform intricate formations in a way guaranteed to make your pulse race. The U.S. Navy is home to the Blue Angels demonstration team and their Skyhawks. Here they're flying Grumman Tigers. The Blue Angels claim to fly the tightest formations of any demonstration team. Judge for yourself. Just look at the shadows on the runway as they land, sort of like an articulated jumbo jet. That's tight. Here are the Patrouille de France, flying Fouge Magisters. The V-tail is supposed to reduce drag and weight, but with a few exceptions, such as the Beechcraft Bonanza, it's never really caught on with designers. Here they go, back to their nest like a swarm of predatory insects. In the 60s, the Royal Air Force demonstration team flew these Jet Provost trainers. There always seems to be a team of incredibly competent, daring pilots willing to show us what their jets can do. And what a jet can do is quite remarkable. Take, for example, the British Aerospace Harrier. It can lift off vertically from a tennis court or a parking lot or a woodland clearing, rising vertically like a helicopter and accelerating to supersonic speed in a few seconds, ready for whatever needs to be done. The Sea Harrier can use a short shipborne ski jump when there's a heavy load to be carried. During the Falklands War of 1982, both RAF Harriers and Royal Sea Navy Harriers operated together off ships with great success. This maneuver is called VIFing. VIF means vectored thrust in forward flight. It makes the Harrier a wily opponent, enabling the pilot to put the airplane wherever he wants it. The Harrier's performance and maneuverability is very similar to that of the helicopter, and it makes a popular but noisy experience at air shows. Development of vertical takeoff and landing capability has been underway since the late 50s. Here's a NASA experimental aircraft. While this earlier twin model even had helicopter-type landing skids. Listen to this excerpt from a newsreel of the time.
While America experiments with the pogo stick plane, but the tail takeoff is a disadvantage in airline travel. In contrast, British researchers are working along the lines of the flying bedstead, an experimental contraption which is at present little more than an aero engine with a pilot seated on top. These are the first newsreel pictures of the aircraft, which has no wings or rotors. But as we watch it take off vertically from the horizontal position, it fulfills a condition that may well revolutionize flights in the future.
James Bond fans will remember this rudimentary lifting device, which has a very vulnerable landing gear. The concept has since been improved and is known irreverently as the flying pulpit. The pilot simply leans in the direction he wants to go, and he has fuel for 30 minutes of flying time. An early predecessor of the Harrier was the Kestrel, which first flew in 1964. The Yak Forger carrier-borne aircraft is the Soviet version. The less sporty jets have another use, carrying people, lots of them. The first jumbo, the Boeing 747, had its maiden flight in 1969. It has grown over the years into the example shown here with a stretched upper deck. The 747 can carry over 400 passengers in this version. Weighing close to 400 tons on takeoff, the 747 needs a huge landing gear, consisting of 4 sets of main wheel bogies for a total of 16 wheels, plus a pair of wheels up at the front end. The 747 makes a typical final approach at 150 knots, that's 170 miles an hour. It descends at about 700 feet per minute, touching down at 145 knots. After touchdown, the crew will reverse the thrust of the engines to help slow the big bird down. In a moment, she'll be on the ground. Look for deployment of the spoilers on the top of the wing to dump lift as soon as the wheels touch the runway, helping to pin the big monster to the ground. 747s are still the biggest aircraft to be found at your average airport, but the jumbo era is truly upon us, with huge 3-engine jets like this DC-10 taxiing by, and now even twin-engine jumbos like this Airbus of Swiss Air. The A300 has twin aisles and can squeeze in as many as 345 people. Up front, the flight crew prepares for departure. Clearance received, the aircraft moves out. The Airbus comes with what is called a glass cockpit. Instead of bank upon bank of similar-looking dials, key information is presented to the pilots as they need it on the screens to show critical facts for the phase of operation they are handling. Double and triple systems are backed up by the conventional gauges for safety. However, it's clear that the airliner of today requires a steady source of reliable electrical power to operate. The Airbus gathers speed in its takeoff roll, and the pilots monitor the Electronic Flight Information System, EFIS, to set the correct rotation angle for takeoff. This screen replaces the conventional artificial horizon and in addition shows speed, radar altitude, and climb. With the aircraft approaching target altitude, attention shifts to the navigation display below. This shows the heading, flight routing, and any precipitation detected by the weather radar. The glass cockpit is a boon to a 2-pilot airplane like the Airbus. The Boeing 707, this one's landing at Hong Kong, and the Douglas DC-8 were the most common global airliners in the 60s and 70s. These 4-jet airliners were to be seen everywhere. Commuting via jet wouldn't be possible or typical without post-war developments like this British newsreel from 1952 shows.
Britannia is a 70-ton turboprop 93-seater, range 4 to 5,000 miles. At the Bristol Airplane Company, news of top priority for jet airliners found the plant already on its toes. Britannia will carry more passengers, further at less cost than any other airliner in the world. Her 4 Proteus turboprop engines make up something like 14,000 horsepower. It's a point of honor down at Bristol that Britannia, quietest airliner aloft, shall earn a big part of that £75 million. The Comet, a pure jet-driven airliner, has been world famous since before it started its commercial career. If they could make 10 times as many, de Havilland's would still have customers queuing up to buy them. Third top priority airliner is the Vickers Viscount, propeller turbined, designed for the shorter journey where the pure jet is hopelessly too dear to run. At Weybridge, it will be capacity production for a long time to come. 4 Rolls-Royce Dart engines, each of 1,400 horsepower, are their part of the secret behind the Viscount performance. And not being piston engines, they're free from vibration. The nation owes a great debt to the aviation industry for putting Britain on top in the air.
The Viscount went on to be a great success with a total production of 444 aircraft. Capital Airlines of the United States helped things along with an early order for 60. The Comet started like a winner too, entering service in 1952 with a flight to Johannesburg. But within 2 years, tragedy struck as 2 comets exploded in midair in quick succession. The investigations began.
Wreckage picked up 12 miles out was taken to Elba. Personal belongings and the 15 bodies so far recovered were most particularly examined. Investigation has taken a more dramatic turn since sabotage has been considered a possibility. Among the luggage was Chester Wilmots. The famous author and journalist was one of the 35 killed when the Comet crashed into the sea. Comet wings, being fatigue tested at Farnborough Royal Aircraft Establishment, are subjected to treatment by hydraulic rams. 1 minute of this produces as much strain as an hour's flying. Just how much work metal can stand without breaking is determined by the test. A vibration test on Meteor tailplanes. Here, 1 second is equal to 1 flying hour. It's been established that there's nothing structurally wrong with the Comet. Dr. Walker and an assistant examined the break in a metal spar made on a test to destruction. At dawn on the runway of the de Havilland Hatfield Aerodrome, Chief Test Pilot Cunningham was all set to take the Comet 2 on a record-breaking flight to Khartoum. Cunningham reckoned on halving the existing 14-hour, 25-minute record. Off the deck at 7:40 a.m., the Comet was at Khartoum in time for tea.
But tank testing did discover a fault, an explosive decompression. No airliner had flown so high so often before, and the constant repetition of high-altitude climbs and descents, and thus pressurization cycles, took their toll on the fuselage, and it soon ripped apart. But de Havilland kept on going and redesigned the aircraft as the Comet 4, which went on to make history.
It was a great race, and Britain won it. Comet 4 Delta Charlie flies into New York, the first jet to carry fare-paying passengers across the Atlantic. And Comet 4 Delta Bravo clinched the victory with a record non-stop west-east flight in 6 hours, 7 minutes on the same day. The first commercial jet service across the Atlantic is established, and BOAC are flying it. Comet's story stretches back into the war, when Britain's all-out effort to produce fighting aircraft gave her no chance to develop civil types. But Sir Frank Whittle's first jet engine gave the opportunity to forge ahead again. For 13 years, development of the Comet went ahead at de Havilland's. First, Comet 1 and failure. Then, the bigger, faster, safer and better Comet 4. But America's research was bounding forward, and after the setback to Comet 1, it looked as though the Boeing 707 would be first across the Atlantic. Everyone everyone believed the race had gone to the United States, and Pan American spent an estimated £500,000 advertising the first transatlantic jet service. Everyone believed it except de Havillands and BOAC, and they'd a surprise up their sleeves. Early delivery of not one, but 3 Comets. And that did it. More than a month ahead of their own schedule, and 3 weeks in front of the Boeing's expected entry into service, BOAC sent off the first regular jet service across the Atlantic. Yes, Comet 4's in business. Britain's aircraft industry can chalk up its greatest post-war triumph.
But it never really recovered, and the Comet evolved into an ugly sister in the shape of the Nimrod, used as a maritime reconnaissance aircraft. Meanwhile, the 707 took the lead. Too noisy for most airports today, its shape lives on as the E-3 AWACS, Airborne Warning and Control Systems. These aircraft have also been ordered by NATO and the Royal Air Force, among others. But that's not all. There's the KC-135 aerial tanker. Speaking of tankers, look what they've done to the DC-10, known here as the KC-10. The KC-10 is just what a thirsty C-141 Starlifter is looking for. Likewise, the C-5 Galaxy. You get a good idea of its size here, don't you? McDonnell Douglas, who make the 10s, KC, and DCs, have some beautiful movies of them. These films are usually taken from a Learjet fitted with a system called Astrovision, a remotely controlled, stabilized movie camera mounted in the belly. Much of our film is Astrovision. Now let's go back to the DC-10 prototype for an Astrovision view of the takeoff. As it accelerates down the runway, the key speeds V1, decision speed, VR, the speed at which the aircraft's attitude is rotated for liftoff, and V2, the climb-out speed, are called out by the co-pilot. 385 DC-10s have been produced and 60 KC-10s. A competitor to the DC-10 was the Lockheed 1011 TriStar, no longer in production. This has a very similar configuration to the DC-10, but a more aesthetically pleasing treatment of the number 2 engine. The TriStar is powered by 3 Rolls-Royce RB211 engines. 1,800 plus Boeing 727s were sold, while the similar Hawker-Siddeley Trident was used mostly by British European Airways. This one belongs to the CAAC, the airline of China. The Trident pioneered the ability to land automatically in fog. Join us on an early test flight. The Trident normally carries up to 101 passengers and a ton of freight. But for this flight, her cabins have been given over to instruments and observers. She's equipped with a fully automatic landing system, and they are recording its performance. Flaps are down, checklists complete, runways ahead. Over to the pilot.
We are now lined up on the ILS beam, in line with the runway. We're descending down the glide path, and we have completed the checklist. That is, we have lowered the undercarriage and flaps and made all the actions necessary to carry out an automatic landing. Ron Clear, one of our senior test pilots, is acting as co-pilot for this flight, and he is monitoring the performance of the system. Normally, for an operational approach, both pilots would be doing this job. At the moment, we're passing 450 feet on the radio altimeters, and this means that we have approximately 1.5 miles to run to touchdown. The autopilot is controlling the airplane, the flight path of the airplane, and the automatic throttles on the 2 outboard engines are controlling the speed of the airplane. We're now passing 200 feet with 3/4 mile to run. The landing will commence at 65 feet, at which point the throttles will close and the autopilot will pitch the nose of the airplane up for the landing flare. The flare is now beginning, and we should very shortly be touching down round about now.
Training is carried out mostly in flight simulators, incredibly accurate copying machines that can duplicate the feel and performance of a specific aircraft. These pitch, roll, yaw, surge, sway, and heave to generate the correct sensory perceptions to the pilot sitting inside. The instructor programs the situation with a touchscreen control panel, even selecting the starting position on the airport. Takeoff is commenced, and all the right noises and sensations are heard and felt. Through the windshield, the pilots see a computer-generated airport environment projected by TV onto a wide screen, giving a continuous field of view of 150 degrees horizontally by 40 vertically. This rediffusion simulator is for the Boeing 747. Let's take a look at that computer-generated image of a typical runway. Notice the texturing of the runway. Any runway at any particular airport anywhere in the world can be generated day or night. Time for a trip in a Tornado. This swing-wing supersonic strike aircraft is a joint venture of the British, German, and Italian aircraft industries. It has two 15,000-pound thrust engines. Tornado's radar-controlled flight and navigation systems are so good that it can fly automatically, even down to treetop height in terrible weather. Day or night, it can fly when others cannot. The Tornado is in squadron service with the Royal Air Force. Let's go low flying. Tornado has a crew of 2. The wings have variable sweep so they can be set for the optimum position, straight for low-speed flying and swept back for high-speed performance. Like nearly all current military combat aircraft, the Tornado has in-flight refueling capability. Here it is taking a drink from a converted Victor bomber. And there's even a buddy system where the Tornado can be used as a tanker too. With wings at minimum sweep, our Tornado comes in for a landing. Spoilers, thrust reversers, and powerful brakes obviate the need for the ubiquitous braking parachute. The Tornado is part of Europe's first line of defense. It's a true multi-role combat aircraft. Not to be confused with the Tornado, here is the earlier Jaguar, a joint British and French project. Its role is that of tactical support, ground attack, and reconnaissance. Jaguar offers enormous flexibility because it can operate from grass fields, thanks to its big, low-pressure tires and its STOL performance. Jaguar has a long range and very high maneuverability. It's supersonic and, like the Tornado, can handle low-flying missions through rough terrain. It has two 4,600-pound thrust Azure turbofan engines with reheat. Jaguar can carry up to 10,000 pounds of external load and is armed with two 30mm cannons. With leading-edge slats, full-span double-slotted flaps, spoilers, air brakes, and a braking chute, Jaguar can even land on your local flying club's grass strip. The Swedes have their own aircraft industry, Saab, and one of the hottest combat airplanes around, Viggen, which first flew in 1967. This double delta is in service with the Swedish Air Force, the Flygvapnet. With sophisticated electronics, Viggen can compete with practically anything in the sky. An important part of U.S. air superiority is the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle, which first flew in 1972, entering service in 1974. The aircraft is also operated by the Israeli and Saudi Air Forces. The rate of climb is mind-boggling, as you can see. Whenever there's an unidentified target entering U.S. airspace, interceptors are dispatched to investigate and monitor. This is a Russian Bear reconnaissance aircraft built by Tupolev. This game has been going on for ages. Here we have a Convair F-102 doing the same job, countering the threat. The threat is real. The Soviets have some of the most advanced flying machines available. This one can do Mach 3. These are MiG-25 Foxbats. And here's the MiG-23 Flogger, a slightly earlier aircraft that first flew in 1967. MiG-23s sit ready for action. Before the Flogger came the fish bed, the MiG-21. This looks like the Red Star acrobatic team. This fish bed has a rocket-assisted takeoff system for very short runways. More Russian Bears. See the missile in the belly? The Soviets seem to be unique in their propensity to put huge turboprops on sharply swept wings. So if you see a swept-wing turboprop going over, it's one of theirs. In scenes somewhat reminiscent of Fritz Lang's Metropolis, these Antonov 12 aircraft demonstrate their heavy lift capability. And if it's not paratroops, it's parafreight. This is the British answer to the AN-12, the short Belfast. It was designed to be a pure jet transport, hence the engines on pods. The Super Guppy is a converted Boeing Stratocruiser. It's used to transport large parts of airplanes like Airbus fuselages. Probably the most successful heavy lifter is the Lockheed C-130 Hercules. These are in service with air forces around the world. There's also a civilian version. Demonstrating its versatility, this Hercules is refueling a brace of slow-flying Phantoms. This is one of two systems of air refueling. This is the probe and drogue system. The receiving pilot aims his probe into the drogue being towed by the tanker. On Astrovision, a Lockheed C-5 Galaxy is about to replenish its fuel supply from a KC-10 tanker. This is the flying boom method of refueling. An operator in the tanker's tail actually flies the refueling probe into the receptacle. The receiving aircraft simply sits in tight formation and drinks the fuel in. The C5 opens at either end so a large vehicle can be driven on and straight off with no need to reverse. The Soviet version is the Antonov 124 here at the Paris Air Show. The sheer scale of the airplane creates the illusion of a slow landing. The 124 weighs in at almost 450 tons. It has four 51,000-pound thrust turbofans and can carry a 165-ton payload, like a complete SS-20 IRBM missile system. NATO calls it the Condor. The 747 lifts precious cargo like the NASA Space Shuttle. This is the first test flight of the Enterprise, the shuttle prototype. The shuttle returns from orbit as a glider. Its landing capabilities needed to be tested before developing the orbit program. Other tests preceded the shuttle as NASA worked to get the shape right. These lifting bodies by Martin Marietta and Northrop were used to develop shape ideas for reusable space vehicles. Another machine NASA kept dropping was the X-15, the rocket-powered high-speed aircraft. This could go to the edge of space, 354,000 feet at about 4,100 miles per hour. NASA spends a lot of time testing new concepts and configurations in wind tunnels. Rumor has it that inspiration for this swing wing design came from a pair of scissors. It's much less complex and lighter than a variable swing wing like the Tornado. Can it do the job? NASA is finding out. The Germans have played with swept wings for years. They even had a swept forward wing design in World War II. Grumman has developed the X-29, a proof-of-concept fighter with swept forward wings and a canard, swept-back tail. It is so unstable that it must be controlled at all times by a fly-by-wire computer. It is designed to do away with the need for reheat or afterburning. The General Dynamics F-111 fighter bomber was one of the first aircraft with a variable swept wing. The testing process has been going on for ages, as these clips from the 50s demonstrate.
Launched in midair from a B-29 at Edwards, California, the Bell X-1A, said to be able to fly faster than 1,700 miles per hour. Its rocket-driven predecessor, the X-1, was the first piloted plane to crack the sonic barrier and fly faster than the speed of sound. Now this new, faster experimental job is undergoing tests.
Test pilot Scott Crossfield had the distinction of flying Skyrocket in man's latest quest for super speed. At Muroc, California, the research plane was attached to a B-29. At 32,000 feet, a small chase plane alongside checked the priming of the rocket engine. 6 miles above the surface of the Earth, the great bomber released Skyrocket. In the next 3 minutes, consuming 3 tons of fuel, the research craft flew at 1,327 miles an hour, twice the speed of sound. A truly breathtaking achievement. This film is enlarged from that shot by the small cameras used on the flight. There's a big gap between experimental and flying in general, but London, New York in 2¼ hours may not be too far off.
The 1955 Bell X-2 continued the program, reaching over 2,000 miles per hour and 126,000 feet. Meanwhile, research in Europe was leading towards the development of the Concorde. This is the French Sud-Quest, Trident high-speed research aircraft, powered by a big rocket in the tail and a jet engine on each wingtip. This is the Dassault Mirage, developed in the 50s. High-speed wind tunnels were used to test configurations in wing airfoil sections on scale models. Here's what happens to air at supersonic speeds. Eventually, the definitive Concorde shape evolved and was subjected to further intensive wind tunnel testing. The airflow at different angles of attack was measured at different speeds. The pressure capsule of the fuselage was immersed in a water tank to test its structural integrity. A simulator was built to develop the flight deck and test handling. This was well before computer imaging. Instead, a TV camera actually flew over a scale model to show landing approach scenes to pilots. Development progressed, parts were built, and eventually the nose section and main fuselage were brought together. The mating worked perfectly. Everything lined up. And soon, the prototype was virtually complete. Here it makes its bow. And its first flight. The testing always continues. This is the EAP, Experimental Aircraft Program. It's powered by two 9,000-pound thrust turbofans plus reheat. It's designed to explore a high angle of attack using fly-by-wire control. Spy planes are a hot subject for designers. This is the SR-71, the Lockheed Blackbird. This titanium aircraft can cruise at 1,200 miles per hour and at an altitude of 82,000 feet, taking pictures continually. The Blackbird is from the same stable as the famous Lockheed U-2. This is the TR-1, a U-2 derivative. The Blackbird is one of the most intriguing aircraft in the world. Who knows where it's been or what it's seen? On carriers, the last thing you do before takeoff is make sure your controls are free and clear. The steam catapult does the rest. These are Grumman F-14 Tomcats. An F-4 Phantom. A Vought Crusader. A Grumman Tracer. The Phantoms are coming. The USS Forrestal, one of the U.S. Navy's nuclear-powered carriers. From here, you can see the angled deck. The threat is always there. This Badger dropped in for a close look. The pilot gets ready to land. He lines up on the carrier, and landing signal officer talks the pilot in. In the groove, and down. A Hornet landing. Phantom coming in. As soon as you touch the deck, you go to full power in case the arresting hook misses. Phantom coming in, and down safely. Hawkeye coming in, down. This is what does all the work in a carrier landing. Putting one down in a space the size of a small garden takes extra skill. That's why Navy pilots are hailed as the hottest of the hot. Let's look at some turboprops. This is the de Havilland of Canada -7, a 4-engine Stoll transport. The Buffalo comes from the same stable. This defines the term short landing. Rearward flight capability? Not true, even on the -8. The Dornier 228 is another successful Stoll turboprop that can carry up to 19 passengers and operate from grass runways. It's popular as a commuter airliner. The jet age started here, in Lutterworth, England. Power Jets Limited was the company formed to develop the first jet engine. And here it is, the Whittle W1. In 1928, a thesis was written by a 21-year-old Royal Air Force cadet that proposed the jet engine concept. The man was Frank Whittle. Here's the W2, which powered the first British jet-engined airplane, the Gloucester Whittle E-28/39. It made its flight on May 15, 1941, from Cranwell. The first jet to fly was the Henkel 178, not this Gloucester, which first flew in 1939. This is the Gloucester. The British sent an engine over to the United States, and this was quickly used in the first U.S. jet, the Bell Aerocomet, here on its first flight in 1942. Meanwhile, the Germans had developed the Messerschmitt 262, a twin-jet fighter that saw a little combat at the tail end of World War II. And the Royal Air Force had the Gloucester Meteor, which was used effectively against the menace of the V-1 Doodlebug. The jet age has come so far in its first 50 years. You can be sure that the designers will keep designing, the testers testing, the builders building, and the people flying.